Today, I'm going to show you how to create Hogwarts Acceptance Letter Cookies. Okay, so to make our sugar cookies, we will need 1.5 cups of sugar, 1 cup of butter softened, 3 eggs, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, half a teaspoon of salt, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, and 4 cups of flour. We will also need a spatula to scrape down the sides. We will need a rolling pin, as well as a cookie cutter. I actually have a square cookie cutter and I want it to be rectangle, so I have a straight edge there and a knife so that I can trim it down. And then I'm also going to be using a bench scraper to transfer it to my baking sheets. We will need either a stand mixer or a hand mixer. I'm going to be using my KitchenAid. And then we're going to need some cookie sheets that are lined with parchment paper to help keep your cookies from sticking, and an oven that is preheated to 350 degrees. Let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is cream our sugar and butter together, and it's really important that your butter is softened at room temperature and that it's not melted and it's not too cold. It will change the consistency of your cookies. So make sure they're just softened at room temperature, and then we're going to go ahead and cream our sugar in with it. And we want to make sure that this mixes until it is light and fluffy. Okay, so once our mixture is light and fluffy, we're then going to go ahead and start to add our eggs, and we're going to try to add them in one at a time, just so then that way they can incorporate completely. And once our eggs are added in, we're then going to go ahead and add our vanilla. Now that that's mixed in, I'm going to go ahead and add my dry ingredients into my flour bowl. And we're going to give that a good mix before we start to incorporate it into our mixture. And now we're going to start to gradually add that in. Okay, and once everything is mixed in, we have a really great dough. Okay, so now that my dough is ready, I'm just going to take a bit of it and put it here on my floured surface. And then I'm going to sprinkle some more flour on it. And roll it out. Now that my dough is rolled out, I'm going to take my cookie cutter and I am just going to cut out my square. And then, like I said, because I want these to be a rectangle, I'm actually going to overlap it a little bit so that it kind of cuts the rectangle for me, and then the one up above will be a rectangle as well. And then I'm going to move them to my cookie trays that are covered in parchment paper, and I'm going to bake them at 350 degrees for 7 to 10 minutes depending on your oven. We don't want these to brown, we just want them to cook. So we do want to monitor it. It usually is about 8 or 9 minutes, I feel like, depending on your oven when they're done. But we're going to come back and I'll have some baked cookies. These just came out of the oven. We're going to go ahead and let them cool. I've transferred them to a cooling rack because we want to make sure that they are completely cool and at room temperature before we decide to frost them. So while these are cooling, we're going to go ahead and whip up our royal icing. The things we will need to create our royal icing is 4 pounds of powdered sugar, which is usually 2 bags, 3/4 of a cup of meringue powder, and that's the amount that is in the 4-ounce container. We will need 2 tablespoons of vanilla or whatever flavoring you might like. And then 1 1/3 cups of warm water, and the warm water is needed to be able to make sure that the meringue powder gets dissolved correctly. You'll also need either a stand mixer or a hand mixer, and then a spatula to scrape down the sides. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is take our powdered sugar, which I've transferred into my mixing bowl, and we are going to add our meringue powder, and then we're just going to lightly mix it up to kind of incorporate the meringue powder into the powdered sugar. And to do that, I'm going to use a whisk. You could also turn your mixer on, but because this is so full, I like to do a little bit of hand mixing just at the very beginning, and then do the rest of the mixing with the actual mixer. And now that we've mixed the meringue powder in, I'm then going to take my vanilla, and I'm actually going to pour it into the water so that those two can combine. And then that way I can pour the water into my sugar and meringue powder mixture, and it will be more evenly distributed. So we're going to dump that in, and as you can see, it starts to already melt some of that powdered sugar. And then again, I'm just going to do a little bit of hand mixing just to start it, so you don't get that big, huge cloud of powdered sugar. You may still get a little bit of that, but it just kind of helps to make it not quite as powerful. Okay, now that we've lightly incorporated some of our wet ingredients with the dry ingredients, I'm going to go ahead and add my whisk onto my mixer, and then we're going to just start to mix this up. So you're going to notice as it starts to mix that it is almost kind of a creamy color, and we want it to become more white. So you'll know when your icing is done when it has become more of a white and you get stiff peaks. So at this point, it can take up to 10 minutes to get it to that point, but now that it's all incorporated, I'm going to move the speed up, and we should see those peaks form a little more quickly. Okay, and that's actually where I want it to be at this point, because right now we are at outline consistency. So as you can see, we kind of get peaks and then the top just folds over slightly, which is about what the outline consistency normally is when I do these cookies. So I'm going to stop mixing now because it's already at the consistency that I want it to be. Okay, so because the acceptance letters are in a kind of tan parchment looking paper, I actually want to make my frosting more of a tan color. So I'm going to add just a drop or so of brown food coloring, and then I'm going to mix that in. And I'm going to add just a little more. It's always good to start off with a small amount and then work your way up more, because you can't take it out once you've put it in. Okay, so I don't know how well you guys are going to be able to see this on camera, but we got just a very light, very, very, very light tan or off-white, which is what I really wanted. I didn't want it to be pure white. I didn't want it to be tan. I kind of wanted it to just look ivory, or a little bit of like a really, really, really light peachy color. So at this point, you could store this if you weren't going to frost your cookies for a little while. And the best way to do that is to put it in a bowl and put a paper towel, a couple paper towels that have been completely soaked and wrung out, over the top of the bowl, and then either seal it with a lid or very tightly with foil, and that'll keep it for a couple hours. If you put it in with a lid, it will actually keep for quite a long time, and that's why I like the meringue powder. You can actually make big batches of this and store it in your fridge, and all you have to do is just kind of throw it in the mixer and mix it back up in case anything's separated, and you're good to go. So that's what you could do at this point. Right now, we're going to go ahead and start to get ready to pipe our cookies. Now I'm getting my frosting ready to be able to be piped onto our cookies, and we're going to actually use the saran wrap technique, and it's where you take your frosting and put it right in the saran wrap and twist the ends, and we can put it right into our piping bags. This will allow for us to be able to reuse the piping bags if we'd like to, or just have less mess. So this is our frosting straight from the batch, so this is going to be our outline frosting. And all I did was wrap this in here and twist it up, and then we're going to take our piping bag and put this in here, our end in here, and pull the saran wrap edge out. And then all we're going to do is snip this at our tip, and this will be ready to pipe. And I am going to be using a number 2 tip for the outline edging. And we are just going to put this on our coupling and then put the screw top over that. And this is ready to pipe. So we're going to do the same thing with our flooding icing, and to get your frosting to the right consistency for flooding, you're just going to add some water, about a tablespoon or half a tablespoon at a time, until it gets to this consistency where you see the little ribbons disappear within 5 seconds. And that's perfect consistency for flooding. So we're going to put this on our saran wrap as well. You're just going to fold your saran wrap over and over again, pick it up, and spin it. Okay, and then when you have your little bunch, then we can take our piping bag, and all I'm going to do is cut the end off. And put the inside coupling piece in. Push it down all the way. Okay. And then we're going to, again, put this down through the hole. We can then snip the end. Put our piping tip on, and I'm going to use a number 5 for flooding. You can also use one of the little icing bottles that have the little tip already on there. That would work just as fine as well. And now we're ready to pipe. Okay, so before we can start to frost our cookies, I need to use a template that I've made, and I'll put a link in the description down below so that you can cut this out. And I'm doing this on a clear vellum plastic, just so that in that way it won't pick up any of the oils or anything from the cookies. You could use regular paper, just know that you may end up needing to print a couple of these. So I'm going to hold this in place, and then I'm going to use an edible marker. This is like a food coloring writer. And I am just going to follow the edge and trace the design roughly onto my cookie so that I know where to make my outline for the envelope. And now that I've made my outline, I can go ahead and take my outline icing and create my borders. And once the outline is completely piped, you want to go ahead and let this sit for about 5 or 10 minutes to harden up before you flood the area. Now that the outline has dried, we're going to go ahead and take our flooding icing, and we are just going to roughly pipe on the inside of the top area. And then I'm going to take a toothpick, or if you have a scribe tool, you can use that as well. And I am just going to work the frosting to the edge of my outline. Now that our top section is piped, we're going to let this dry for about 10 or 15 minutes. So I'm going to go through and do the tops of all of my cookies. And then once the top kind of gets a little bit of a hard coating on it, then we can go ahead and do the base of the envelope, and they won't run together. Now that the top half of our cookie has crusted over, I'm going to go ahead and flood the bottom half. And while you're waiting for your top half to crust over, it's helpful to take a cup and put a wet paper towel on the bottom, so then that way your tip doesn't get all crusty from sitting out and drying out. And now that I've flooded the bottom half of my envelope, I'm going to let this sit and dry until it completely crusts over. That's a good couple hours to even overnight if you really want it to dry all the way through. But the top will crust over fairly quickly within about a half hour to an hour. Now, to make our chocolate wax seals, we're going to take some candy melts, and I've taken the red candy melts, and I've added just a couple of the chocolate candy melts in there so that when I melt this, it'll be a darker red color. And then we have our wax stamp and some parchment paper. So the wax stamp needs to be in the freezer if possible. Overnight, you'll get the best results that way. If not, at least put it in a cup that's completely submerged in ice, so then that way it really chills your stamp, and then just make sure to dry it before you use it. So we're going to go ahead and start to melt this, and then we can make our stamps. Okay, I have my melted chocolate here and my parchment paper, and all I'm going to do is cut the end of my piping bag here, and I am going to pipe some blobs that we are then going to stamp with the wax stamper. Okay, and I have my wax stamp in a cup with ice in between the freezer and that. So all I'm going to do is dry that off quickly and hit the blob. Okay, as you can see, I was able to get 4 wax stamps, and I actually really like the imperfections around the outside edges. I almost think it gives it more of a realistic look. And we're going to be applying these to the cookies with more of the chocolate, so that way it will actually kind of go out on the edges a little bit too, which can kind of either fix or give a little bit of an imperfection to your wax stamp. Now that our cookie has dried and has a complete crust over top of all of the frosting, we're going to go ahead and apply our faux wax seal. So I'm going to use a little bit of my leftover candy melts, but you could also use some of the royal outline icing to apply this as well. Anything is fine. You're basically just using it as a type of glue. And all we're going to do is squeeze a little bit and then apply our wax stamp. And there you have it, our Hogwarts Acceptance Letter Cookies. These would be a great addition to a Harry Potter party, or something fun to have during a Harry Potter movie marathon, or you can drown your sorrows that you didn't receive your Hogwarts acceptance letter with it. If you guys like this video, give me the thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, and we will catch you guys later. Thanks so much.